down to the bones of a scheme to shelter money for the sake of Donald Trump and his siblings and forsaking tax liability allegedly to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So what does it mean for the president? Is this why he doesn't want to show us his taxes? We have a perfect guest to ask one of the big names that Democrats have to take on Trump in 2020. Former AG Eric Holder is here. The Russia investigation, the Rosenstein ruckus, and what he says is the hidden boogeyman in the midterms. All this news cannot distract from the FBI watch on the Kavanaugh confirmation. We have breaking news tonight on the investigation. So what do you say? Let's get after it. All right, we have a new investigation by the New York Times. They're telling me to rush over. I can't with my neck. The investigation takes a look at how much Fred Trump loved his son Donald and his other children and hated paying taxes. It is a granular probe, 100,000 pages of filings and documents, depositions and experts and insiders, all coming together to paint a picture of outright fraud, according to the paper, in part allowing President Trump to increase the massive fortune he received from his father, Fred. What's the headline for the president? Self-made, my eye. Trump says he hit a home run in business, but turns out he wasn't just born on second base, as we all know. His father carried him around third and threw him toward home. Exhibit A. Trump has long insisted that his father provided almost no financial help and a small loan of $1 million. Take a listen.
My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. I came into Manhattan, and I had to pay him back, and I had to pay him back with interest. I started with $1 million loan. I built a $10 billion company. My father gave me a very small loan in 1975, and I built it into a company that's worth many, many billions of dollars. I built that into a massive empire, and I paid my father back that loan.
Worth about $140 million in current dollars, okay? Trump called his father's business just good, not great. Fred Trump was worth way more than his son, apparently, and he larded cash on him from jump. By age 3, Mr. Trump was earning $200,000 a year in today's dollars from his father. He was a millionaire by age 8. The biggest payday he ever got from his father came when Trump and his siblings sold off the empire. Donald's cut was $177 million, or $236 million in today's dollars. But that was just a piece of the pie that Fred Trump was feeding his self-made son over the years. All in all, the Times says that self-made Trump received at least $413 million in current currency from his father's real estate empire. The Times documented 295 streams of revenue that Fred Trump created over 5 decades to enrich his son and to minimize taxes by all legal means and, according to the Times, questionably legal and maybe worse than questionably legal. So how'd they do it? Well, they did it by creating, according to the New York Times, sham corporations, by filing improper tax deductions and undervaluing real estate. Now, if you're not a multimillionaire or you haven't spent time investigating them, you won't know that that's not that unusual. Rich people find ways to hide money. There are a lot of loopholes in the tax code that they use. But then there's how he helped Trump's fate as a quiet investor and helped bail out many failures. What do we know? In December of 1987, records show Fred Trump bought a 7.5% stake in Trump Palace. So what? That's not wrong. He wants to invest in his son. Fair enough. But most, if not all, of the investment, which totaled about $15.5 million, was made by exchanging Donald Trump's unpaid debts for Trump Palace shares. This is according to records. Get it? He owed his father money. His father bought a part of his property. His son gave him shares, and that retired the debt. You see what I'm saying? He didn't pay it back. So the shares were worth $15.5 million. He then sold it back for $10,000. Well, what does that mean? $15.5 million, you sold it back for $10,000. That's a gift of $15.49 million, taxable as a gift. Fred Trump reported no such gift. Did Donald Trump? I don't know. All in all, the Times says Fred and Mary Trump transferred well over $1 billion in wealth to their children. By the way, that's not really wrong, right? You have money, you want to give it to your kids, we understand. But what about the taxes? 55%, estate tax, right? That would be $550 million. The Trumps paid a total of $52.2 million. It's about 5% of what they were supposed to, according to tax records obtained by the Times. So how's the president responding? As usual, deny everything through his lawyer and attack the source. This is the response. The New York Times allegations of fraud and tax evasion are 100% false and highly defamatory. President Trump had virtually no involvement whatsoever with these matters. The Times says he was certainly part of the architecting of this scheme. The affairs were handled by other Trump members who were not experts themselves and therefore relied entirely upon the aforementioned licensed professionals to assure full compliance with the law. The White House is also responding. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says this: "It's sad to witness this misleading attack against the Trump family by the failing New York Times. Many decades ago, the IRS signed and reviewed and signed off on these transactions." Sarah, the $1 million thing, you got to be careful. She tells the story that the president tells. He only gave me $1 million, I paid it back with interest. We now know that's not true. So if you keep saying that you know isn't true, you wind up owning that untruth yourself. And it raises a question, all this. Is this why Trump won't show us his taxes? Is he moving money the same way? Let's bring in the experts. Michael Zeldin, he used to investigate exactly these types of transactions for the government. Jennifer Rogers and Stephen Moore all have expertise in what we're talking about here, and I thank you all very much. Michael Zeldin, let me start with you. Legally, I don't see it. Statute of limitations, maybe on the civil side, fines. But when you look at what's in this report by the Times, what gives you pause?
So you always have to, in these matters, make sure that you understand the difference between lawful tax avoidance and illegal tax evasion. So you have to really parse these transactions, almost transaction by transaction, to see whether or not they were, as you said in the setup, taking advantage of loopholes within the tax code, which would be lawful avoidance, or and running them in terms of legal evasion. What stands out to me most is the valuations of these properties. That is, for tax purposes, there was a low value set for the property so that taxes paid were reduced. And when collateralizing for other loans and matters by which they sought equity, the value was inflated. So that movement of value of property within a short period of time, to me, reflects more on the evasion side of the ledger than the avoidance side of the ledger.
Well, there's something, Jennifer, let's bring you in on this. I thought what was most interesting in terms of architecture was when the family, or whomever winds up having the guilt in this, or the responsibility, let's say, of putting together that company that was a double layer on top of the vendors, so that people would sell things to the Trump properties. This company would then invoice them, pay them back, and then elevate the price and charge the Trump organization directly, Fred Trump, therefore filtering more money from him to where he wanted it for the kids. That's fishy.
That's right. That's the one that looks to me to be the most criminal, although, as we know, they're all too old to charge now. But that's the one where you actually have really kind of a run-of-the-mill fraud, not just a tax evasion, but a regular old wire fraud or mail fraud. I mean, and here they are literally defrauding people, defrauding the government, but also defrauding others, including ultimately some of their tenants as they try to raise prices based on what we know is false information now, according to the reporting.
Stephen, I am a lousy investor, but if you give me $400 million, I'm going to do okay. I have the timeline up behind me because I do believe this is about honesty on one level. The president saying that he got $1 million from his father when he got 60, that he says he was self-made and Fred Trump was only good, but he was great, when Fred Trump obviously had way more in assets than he's ever had. And we see in this clear timeline that he has just been feeding from the Fred trough his entire life. Isn't this the truth? Isn't this something that he should own instead of saying he's a self-made man?
Well, let's get to the heart of the matter, which is the issue of whether or not he was involved in criminal fraud, as one of you just said, and whether he was guilty of tax evasion, which is a crime, tax avoidance, as we've all agree on is not a crime. In fact, every good businessman and woman in America does tax avoidance.
It's a skill set.
Everyone wants to reduce their tax liability.
Of course they do. Nobody wants to pay more in taxes. I got you.
Right. So let me make my point. So I want to get this story straight because it just doesn't add up. Donald Trump has probably been audited hundreds of times. There's probably not too many people in America who have been audited more than Donald Trump.
How do you know that?
So he said it. Well, first of all, why wouldn't they audit him? So now, but here's my point. So you're asserting that these 3 reporters from the New York Times have discovered all of this tax fraud when hundreds of IRS auditors didn't find it? I mean, that just isn't plausible. Incidentally, the New York Times, this is about the 4th or 5th time the New York Times has run this story. I remember they ran the story 6 months before the election. They keep repeating the story, time and time again. Oh, it's all news. It's not new.
A lot of it is new. I did this investigating. I did it with a team at ABC News. We got to this. It would be comical if it weren't so scary at the time.
Well,
I would have phone dialogues with Donald Trump where every time we would give him an estimate of his net worth, Stephen, you ask him if this is true or not.
Okay.
Because I know it is.
Let's say that it was $100 million. For somebody to take $100 million and turn that into a $10 billion business, that's one hell of a businessman.
You know that he has a $10 billion business?
Well, look at the enterprise. You can see it in your own 2 eyes.
No.
Every city in America has a Trump hotel.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean he owns them.
Real estate
They're
development.
licensing deals.
I mean, he's an incredible
He doesn't own the property.
businessman.
Look, we're going to take a break because there's a lot to chew on here.
Okay.
Because we've got facts and then we've got feelings about the president, and they are not meshing, okay? Is he a self-made billionaire? Is he a billionaire? Maybe, probably. Most will say yes. Self-made? How do you make the case? Is he responsible for a scheme to transfer money in a way that it should not have been done? Maybe. We have a lot more to go through with our panel. I've never seen more granular reporting than the New York Times has. We also have a former attorney general who could be a future presidential candidate. What is his take on all this? Coming up. I am one hell of a businessman. I built myself a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, pulling myself up on my bootstraps. A New York Times investigation says, nah, nah, nah. He built it with tax schemes and outright fraud. That's what they say. Still with us, Michael Zeldin, Stephen Moore, and Jennifer Rogers, 2 former prosecutors and an economic expert. That's what I'm giving you, Stephen Moore. But let me ask you this. This is the question for Michael Zeldin. You heard the redoubtable Stephen Moore say it's a $10 billion business he built. He's been audited dozens of times. What do you make of those statements?
I have no basis to know whether that's true, nor do I think does Stephen. So the easiest way to resolve this uncertainty is for the president to release his past 10 years of personal and corporate business tax records so that we can understand what is the truth and what is the fiction in this. The other thing is that much of the tax evasion avoidance discussion with respect to the New York Times story would relate to Fred Trump, the father's tax returns and how these were addressed. And we don't know the answer to how, if they were audited at all. So I think Stephen is assuming facts not in evidence, and until we see those tax returns, we can assume only that the Times, I think, mostly has it right. Until proven otherwise.
And nobody likes to have the tax man in their life, Stephen. Nobody wants to have the tax man in their life. But one thing has to be pointed out, when you and I were going at it in the commercial, Jennifer came in to speak a little truth to power. And all audits are not equal. Jennifer, come in on this discussion on this. The idea of, well, he was audited, everything must be fine.
Yeah, I mean, listen, these IRS agents are busy people. They pay more attention to some things than to others. They pay more attention to personal taxes than they do to business taxes in a lot of ways. And, as we were talking about, sometimes they don't pay any attention at all if you say you've earned nothing, right? They pay more attention if you actually give sort of an evaluation of what it is, and then they'll bicker back and forth with you. So, we don't know what went on at the time. I'm sure they were looked at to some degree. But, I mean, the numbers here that they've presented are staggering in the undervaluing. I mean, it has to be intentional. And whether it's Donald Trump or the professionals that they surrounded themselves with, I'm not sure. The all-county thing, the shell company thing, looks to me to be clearly a fraud. The rest of it, who knows? We need to know more.
Stephen, I'm willing to look past everything. Hold on one second, Michael. Stephen, I'm willing to look past everything about the father. God bless him for making that money. God bless him for giving it to his kids. Good for him for finding a way to work the system and do it. Let's assume all that into evidence for a second. It stipulates all of it. My point is this. Donald Trump has been telling a story about himself for a long time that is demonstrably false. And now you see it in the reporting of the timeline you saw. His father transferred hundreds of millions of dollars to him, bailed him out, bought casino chips worth millions of dollars that were never used, took an interest in a building that was paid back at a fraction of the cost, which is just another way to get a gift. That's the truth.
Look, I can't comment on how much money his parents. Look, I just don't know the facts. I don't know how much of this wealth was passed on. But I will say this. Let's say it was $100 million.
$10 billion business. You don't know that he has a $10 billion business.
Most people, it's usually in 1 or 2 generations, a fortune can be squandered and there's nothing left. Donald Trump has taken that money and built an empire. I mean, I just admire him.
How can you say he's not? How can you say he's not? Every city in America has a massive Trump hotel. He's got real estate developments all over the place. He's not his father. He licenses the name.
But let me make one other point.
That's right.
You know, I thought it was rather hypocritical to say, oh, gee, look, Donald Trump isn't paying, his father didn't pay any estate tax. Guess what? The Kennedys didn't pay any estate tax.
Oh, well, then it's okay.
No, but
I forgot about the Kennedys. It's all okay.
No, look, the
Next
Kennedys,
subject.
Bezos isn't going to pay any estate tax. Bill Gates isn't.
Are they the president?
Soros isn't.
Are they president now?
Billionaires don't pay estate tax. That's the reason we shouldn't have an estate tax.
Are they president now and saying they won't turn over their taxes?
Pardon me?
Are they president right now and saying, I won't show you my taxes?
Well, why are we revisiting this? This was all adjudicated during the election.
But I want to know whether or not the guy is doing the same thing that his father did.
I'm going to make a deal with you because this is the heart of the matter.
Please.
Let's find out from the IRS how many times Donald Trump is audited.
Look, I'll give you that as a bet. It is not the heart of the matter.
It is, because if he's been audited hundreds of times, how could the New York Times come up? You're saying that the New York Times is better at auditing these tax returns than the people actually
at the
audit
the returns. They didn't even have the access. Michael, here's the point. Here's the point. People get around the tax code all the time. Legally, kind of legally, and otherwise. My point is this, that Stephen is deflecting from, and rather effectively. I'll give it to him. He's not just good looking. He's got a good mind. Michael, the president says I did it all myself. My father gave me $1 million. He was good at business. He wasn't great. I had to pay him back with interest. The rest, all me. Demonstrably false. Yes or no?
Well, according to the New York Times, demonstrably false. And going back to the point that we are addressing with Stephen Moore, it is the valuations that prove the truth of the proposition, which is when property is valued for tax purposes as worth something much less than when it's sold for a few years later, unless there's some major spike in the real estate market, that is an indicia of false valuation.
Right.
And I think
no,
that
it is
we
not.
see throughout the Time story.
That all the time on tax returns, people depreciate the value of these
They depreciate it, but when you do it so much that grossly defies estimates of other buildings in the same area assessed at the same time, it looks suspicious. But obviously you need more. The problem is we have a president that doesn't want to disclose anything. That's why I wanted to have the discussion. Stephen, Michael, Jennifer, you were the best in the whole panel. Everything you said makes sense. Thank you to all three for making sense of this. This is heady stuff and important stuff. Now, we're going to look at it a different way. When we come back, who would you say is the Democrats' best chance to beat President Trump, if anyone? Eric Holder is going to be on everybody's short list, and he is here. What about the Times report? What does he think? Rosenstein, Mueller, 2020, the FBI with Kavanaugh, all of this. We got the right guest for you when we come back.
Nothing says fall like a homecoming football game, so let's promote our fall travel deal on choicehotels.com like this.
Touchdown.
The scope of the FBI probe appears to be expanding, not by the Senate, but by the FBI itself. They did 4 interviews. That's what we've heard, right? Now we are told they may go beyond that. 2 sources tell CNN that they may look at Kavanaugh's high school friends listed as attending a party on the nominee's calendar from 1982. What does this mean? Let's bring in former Attorney General Eric Holder. Welcome to Primetime.
Good to be here.
It's good to have you, sir. So, the concern with this probe is that it's not a probe. Yeah. They only have a few days. There's a report that they may be done tomorrow. Now we're told that they're seeing something and they might want to expand. How do you make sense of what is logical here?
Well, I think there's a lot of speculation as to what the state of the FBI probe actually is. My hope is that the Bureau is doing what they normally do, which is to be tasked with the responsibility of trying to determine facts, the truth, and then they follow leads. They send people out, they follow the information, and let the information direct them to where they should go, as opposed to being directed by the White House or being circumscribed in their actions by the White House.
But limited in scope was the phrase we kept hearing. If they say we want to chase this down, how does that go with come to me tomorrow?
Now, when I was Attorney General and we had to reopen a background investigation, we might say, we just need you to look at a certain subject matter. And then the FBI was free to go look at that subject. I'm a little concerned that the White House here might have told people, told the FBI to look at certain people, do not speak to other people, far more prescriptive than is normally done.
Problem is, we're probably not going to know, right? I mean, they're going to report back to the White House. White House can tell the Senate. You know, we're going to have to once again depend on leaks. If it comes back that there is good reason to believe that the judge was not honest, not about corroborating the sexual assault allegations. Let's say they have nothing on that. But he didn't tell the truth about what his yearbook means, his habits then, his habits in college. Is that worth not confirming him?
Yeah, I think there are actually a few buckets you have to look at. One, did he commit those acts when he was a teenager with regard to those women? Did he lie while he was testifying in a whole variety of ways before the committee? And then what about his temperament and the way in which he conducted himself in that questioning? Did he conduct himself in the way that you would expect a person who would be on the Supreme Court to? And then in addition to that, you also have his judicial philosophy. But looking at that second one, if he in fact lied to the committee.
What if he just didn't disclose fully? What if he just misrepresented? What if it was more of a sin of omission?
It would depend on, you know, what the omission was about. If it is about that which brought the senators back into that second hearing, that to me seems serious and could, from my perspective, cause a no vote.
Another subject. The President of the United States points out your relationship with Barack Obama as what he wants in an AG. I want somebody to protect my back, somebody who has me the way Holder had Obama's back. Did you see your job that way, as to protect the President?
No, I didn't see my job as protecting the president. My job was to serve the people of the United States. But the other reality is I didn't have to do anything to protect Barack Obama. This president clearly thinks that there are things that he needs to be protected from, and he wants his attorney general to do it, which is inappropriate.
If, when the President, Obama, was asking you to do the job, if there were an investigation going on that you knew you would have to recuse yourself from, is that something you would have disclosed to him? And do you think that's something that the president would have needed to hear from you? Because that's Trump's beef with Sessions, is I put you in there and then you stepped away from the thing that I put you in there to control.
That's kind of an anticipatory thing. You know, when I'm in the process of talking to Barack Obama about whether I'm going to take the job as Attorney General, it's kind of hard to see what it is I'm going to have to be responsible for when I become
All right, this was more
AG.
obvious with the Russia thing outstanding.
Yeah, and I would think that had that been the case, and I would have said to him, you know, Mr. President, it's likely that I'm going to have to recuse myself in the Russia investigation. I don't think that Barack Obama would have seen that as a disqualifier.
Do you think you would have had to step away? You think Sessions did the right thing?
Yeah, I think he clearly did the right thing. I mean, Jeff Sessions and I are on ideological opposite poles. I disagree vehemently with a lot of the things that he's done, but with regard to the recusal, I think that was the appropriate thing to do.
If you were he, would you step down? If Barack Obama, as a man, let alone as a president, talked to you the way Donald Trump talks about Sessions, would you have stayed?
I could not have taken as much as he has taken. I think by taking what he has taken, he not only, you know, weakens himself as Attorney General, it has an effect on the institution. And at some point, you have to say to the president, no, you've got to respond to the president. I mean, these are extraordinary things. I've never seen a president talk to an attorney general in the way that this president has spoken to his attorney general. But I think you have to respond in extraordinary ways, always thinking about how you're going to protect the institution.
Rosenstein, they're buying time. Supposed to be last week, the same day as the hearing. That was nuts to put it on that same day. They bought a week. Supposed to be this week. They're quiet on it.
Right.
Maybe it'll be next week. What do you think happens with Rosenstein?
You know, Rod's a good guy. I've known him for about 20 years. He's a man of integrity. I think he's done an awful lot to help protect the Mueller investigation.
You think he would talk about the 25th Amendment and say he wants to wear a wire and record the president?
That doesn't strike me as Rod. At least not in a serious way.
Right.
I can see him coming back and saying, boy, you're not going to believe what this guy said. I ought to wear a wire the next time I go in there. Or, you know, he's so crazy, we need to think about the 20th Amendment. But the notion that the Deputy Attorney General is going to be serious about leading the cabinet in a 25th Amendment examination, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
Would you now, the same question I asked about Sessions, I'll ask about Rosenstein. As someone who is the wall, no pun intended, between the Mueller investigation and the president, would you step down if you were Rod Rosenstein?
That's a little more difficult in the sense that he's the person who is actually involved in the investigation, I suspect is the protector of the investigation. But I think you always have to realize that the institution is actually bigger than any individual, and that the removal of an individual is not necessarily going to mean that an investigation is going to crumble, that the institution is going to somehow fail. Attorneys general come and go, deputy attorneys general come and go, but the Justice Department keeps chugging along.
Did you know, when you were the Attorney General, that the FBI and the DOJ were populated with a bunch of lefties that were waiting for a moment to strike against the right?
I think that one of the things that you don't do, I served for 12 years as just a line guy in the public integrity section of the criminal division at the Justice Department, my first job when I came out of law school. And one of the things that you did not do was to ever discuss politics with the people who you worked with. So I didn't know the people I worked with were Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, or liberals. In fact, the first guy I ever tried a case with, and that we lost, was a Republican. I didn't find that out until about 20 years after we tried that case.
So you don't buy the McCabe, Strzok, or the Cabal, the 13 Angry Men, that it's a lefty conspiracy?
No, there's no lefty conspiracy, and one only has. Let's go back a little bit and think about the campaign, and think about all the leaks that were coming out of apparently the New York FBI office that were directed at Hillary Clinton. That was not the...
And Comey coming forward. So now this all tees us up for 2020. You want to make this easy for me, or do I have to jump into Tim Russert mode? May he rest in peace. You going to run in 2020?
I am, as I've said, thinking about it. I'm going to decide next year. But right now, I'm just focused on November the 6th and making sure that we have a good midterm election.
So that's not a no?
No, it's not a no. And I've said,
When are you going to decide?
I think first quarter of next year.
You think you could beat him?
It'll be interesting to see. Two guys from Queens. I know how to talk to that guy. I know Donnie Trump. I know that guy.
Do you take him on toe-to-toe, or do you rise above? It's not easy.
It's a combination of both, but it's time for Democrats to be tough. You can't get in it just to make a statement. We have to go into the next contest with the idea that we want to win, and we're going to do everything that we have to do to win. Nothing that's inappropriate, nothing that's illegal, but to hit. When you get hit, you hit back harder.
It's tough to do that and salvage decency. That's what we're dealing with here every night, is that, you want to have a fight, we can have a fight, but how do you do it with decency? How do you disagree and get people to find common ground instead of common enemies? Sure. It's a segue into something you're worried about in the midterms. Everybody's thinking about message. You're saying the fight's over long before you get to who's running because of the redistricting. Yeah. That's the sin of the Democrats. You lost the state seats, right, and the states do the districts. Yep. And then that leads to the Congress members, and then on and on. You say that's a big ill. How do you know it, and what do you do about it?
Well, if you look at what happened in 2011, when the Republicans controlled the redistricting the last time, Princeton has done a study and said that was the worst redistricting, most partisan redistricting in the last 50 years. And we saw what happened over the course of this decade, where Democrats have consistently, in some states, gotten more votes than Republicans and have far less in terms of percentage of representation. That leads to gridlock in Washington, where people do not want to be seen as cooperating with the other side. It leads to cynicism when people see this gridlock. And so what we're trying to do in 2021 is to make sure we have a fair process. Not a gerrymander for Democrats, just a fair process.
How do you fix it?
Well, we're going to have to file lawsuits where we can do that. We are supporting reform efforts where we can do that. I think we should take this out of the hands of politicians altogether and have independent commissions actually draw the lines. I think that's the best way. California does that. Arizona does that. We're supporting efforts like that in Michigan, Utah, Missouri, and Colorado right now.
It's an interesting ground-up platform for a presidential campaign. Yeah. You're literally starting at the grassroots level. Not suggesting that's why you're doing it, but it's a good place to start.
I think that's where we have to start. Democrats have been thrilled about the top of the ticket, and we have ignored people who are down ballot, and that's where everything percolates from, including, as you said, Congress.
Former AG Eric Holder, I hope this is the first of many discussions.
Thanks for having me.
You were born in the Bronx, right?
Born in the Bronx, lived in Queens.
Born in the Bronx, moved to Queens.
There you go, suburbs.
Good move. Thank you, sir. All right, President Trump reflects on the stories of sexual assault that have been bubbling up, and he says it is a scary time in America, but not for the reason you might think. His point has a lot of folks pissed off. Why? Next.
What does it mean to be gender fluid?
I like being called she sometimes.
I use they, them pronouns.
Beyond boy and girl is a brave new world.
Said, whoop, that's out the window. Now when he's talking about Judge Kavanaugh and his accuser especially, he's openly mocking her.
I had one beer. Well, do you think it was? Nope, it was one beer. Oh, good. How did you get home? I don't remember. How'd you get there? I don't remember. Where is the place? I don't remember. How many years ago was it? I don't know. I don't know.
Would they applaud like that when he was talking about not knowing about Stormy Daniels, and he knew every damn thing about it and directed it, and even had his son involved to cover it up? He also told that amped-up Mississippi crowd that women should be worried about their men.
Think of your son. Think of your husband. I've had many false accusations. I've had it all. I've had so many. And when I say it didn't happen, nobody believes me.
That's because there's a question of whether or not it's true. You see Don Lemon in the screen right now. He's got a lawsuit against him from one of the accusers. But the larger issue here, Don, is here we are in a cultural moment where we're trying to tell people it's okay to come forward. Doesn't mean everybody's right. Doesn't mean that as soon as you make an accusation, somebody else has to be punished. But you should come out. It's a safe thing to do. Yeah. What does this message do?
Well, a couple things here. Number one, in the first soundbite you played, I'll get to what the message does in a second. He could be talking about Brett Kavanaugh, except for the one beer part, right? Because I had one beer. At first, I was like, is he mocking Brett Kavanaugh? Because Brett Kavanaugh said, I like beer, I like beer, I like beer. And if you drink that much beer, then who knows what could happen. Is his memory serving him properly? So he should probably think about that before he does that, because the person he is backing up is the person who espouses to loving beer and drinking so much. As far as the message, it's a terrible message, because if you teach your boys to do the right thing and to treat women with respect, then you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
And because they won't put themselves in that situation. And if there is no evidence there, there is no evidence there to back it up. We should be more concerned about young women than we are about men in this culture and society. And so, tone deaf.
I think that, it's tone deaf, but we have to remember what his filter is.
It's also desperate.
He's thinking about himself.
Yeah.
He said yesterday, you know, you've lived a perfect life, and then all of a sudden somebody comes out with an accusation. Who's lived a perfect life?
Yeah.
Only he has. The man who says, I never had to ask God for forgiveness. I've never done anything wrong.
Yeah,
I've never heard anything like that before. But he's thinking about himself, Don, not men.
Yeah, he is. And if you want to know how he feels about women, here's what I would suggest that you do. Google Donald Trump and Howard Stern, and you will figure it out, right? All you got to do is Google that. And by the way, the man that he's backing up, who says he was a choir boy that we talked about last night. If you're going to say you're a choir boy, then you better know your words, how to sing.
Yeah, that was a good part of that line.
Oh, yeah, but then in a letter to that whole Beach Week thing that he keeps in his calendar, we've got the editor of the New York Times on, and we're going to talk about this particular letter that he wrote saying it would probably be a good idea on Saturday the 18th to warn the neighbors that we're loud and obnoxious drunks with prolific pukers among us.
And how does he sign it?
A weak stomach.
How does he sign it?
He signs it FFFFF.
Boy, he sure loves making fun of that stuttering guy.
That's not stuttering.
That's what he says it was.
That is not stuttering. Again, do a Google search. That FFFF is not stuttering, okay? And Devil's Triangle is not a drinking game, all right? And boofing is not flatulence. Just being honest. He knows that. Everybody else does, except for maybe some senators who want to believe him and some people who
What will it mean to senators? What matters to them? We're about to see.
I don't think it's going to matter that much, actually, sadly.
I hope it does. I believe in people taking their duty and their responsibility seriously,
hope you're right.
and we will hold them to it.
We'll see you. All right,
good
see
show.
you, Tim. Thank you, sir. See you soon.
All right, something different next. It is arguably more important than anything else we have discussed to this point. I'm going to introduce you to a man with a story that will twist up everything that you may think you know about opioid addiction and who falls prey. And Dennis Rodman. This is worth sticking around for. That is not Dennis Rodman.
Well, look at this. Styles you need. Well, look at that. Prices you want.
Remember this?
No, I'm just saying, no, I don't give a what I don't give a rat's ass what the hell you think. I'm saying to you, look at these guys here. Look at them.
Yeah, but Dennis, don't put it on them. Don't use them as an excuse for the behavior that you're putting on yourself.
They came here.
You just basically were saying that Kenneth Bay did something wrong. We don't even know what the charges are.
It sounded pretty tough when he couldn't get at me. That was Dennis Rodman in North Korea, not happy with my testing the situation. He was unraveling, not just in the moment, but personally. And he was still relevant, by the way, and he wound up being right about North Korea. Now, all during that, my next guest bore witness to it and helped get Rodman to face his problems by sharing what he had faced himself. His name is Darren Prince, and he is the opioid addict you never hear about. Not someone who can't handle pain or a kid in the sticks popping pills to pass time. He was a success as a teen, and by the side of stars with everything going for him. His fall and unlikely return is a story you have to read. It's called Aiming High. You check every box of success, and yet you had the struggle that so many are having in this society. What does that mean to you?
Well, I like to say that it doesn't matter if you're from Yale or jail or Park Avenue or Park Bench. We're all potentially exposed to addiction. I was a very high bottom opiate addict for 20 plus years and living a complete lie. Very few people knew of it. Eventually, in the end, being stuck in my own head, I was just miserable.
You go on, you start a celebrity representing business. How did you manage to do so much and be so high functioning while fighting such a pernicious addiction?
Once those pills were in my system, Chris, honestly, I just took over a room. From there, they just found out what they thought was the real me. A lot of people didn't realize how sick I really was towards the end. Thank God I was one of the lucky ones. I was blessed on July 2nd, 2008 to turn my bottom into my beginning. I didn't think I can do it, but I fell on my knees with the last of my opiates in my hand, and I stood up. Something came over me. Every fiber in my body wanted this more than anything in my entire life.
The Dennis Rodman interview that was my introduction to the CNN audience for a lot of people on New Day was through Darren. Now, you'll remember, that was like a nightmare interview for Dennis Rodman at the time. I've told you this many times. I wasn't looking for a fight with Dennis Rodman. I was just trying to get to him, but he exploded. What was your take on that, what it meant for Dennis and what it meant to you?
You know, he just overdid it with the booze. Dennis has been open about alcohol. This was an exciting time. It really was, truly. We thought we pulled off something historic, and Dennis thought this great achievement, great accomplishment was like unraveling, and he was going to lose this, you know, amazing historic situation that he put the USA in, and he just overdid it. He's done it before, but as you know, you've got to see the real Dennis too, and he's got a big, beautiful heart to him.
But then something happened that nobody ever imagined. North Korea and the United States having this massive summit, and all of a sudden, Dennis Rodman winds up becoming a clairvoyant, and we hear word from South and North Korea that really Dennis Rodman was an influence in, you know, kind of bridging and understanding. Who would have ever thought that I would interview him again under those circumstances?
It was incredible, man. It went full circle. And Dennis has his own little dream team. Chris Volo, the professor, Joe Turunger. They go out there together. They do these private meetings, and they just make sure that everything's cool, and hopefully something real positive comes out of it.
When I met him in rehab after that, he looked at me and he said, "You know what you did." I said, "I don't know what I did. I don't know that I did anything." And I had a box of donuts. He said, "You want a donut?" And he said, "No, I don't want a donut. You know what you did." He's like, "You lit the match. You lit the match." And I was like, "Dennis, you know, I don't want to get into it with you again. I want to show that you're moving forward." And he owned it immediately. And he goes, "No, it was all me. It was all me."
You know, he's so happy and so proud, and it's a beautiful time in both of our lives.
Darren Prince, thank you so much for writing the book. And please know that as I can help tell the story going forward, I'll be there.
Thanks, my brother.
Aiming High is a book that shows you what it took for Darren Prince to beat addiction, what it takes to keep him off it, and what he showed Dennis Rodman to help him on his way. It is worth reading. Now, when we come back, I have a closing argument about what today means to Donald Trump.